What a wonderful world. Someday I wish upon a star, wake up where the clouds are far behind me, where trouble melts like a lemon drops high above the chimney top. That's where you find me, oh, somewhere over the rainbow, way up high. And the dreams that you dare to, why, oh, why can't I? Okay, this one's for Gabby. Way up high, and the dreams that you dream of once in a lullaby, oh, somewhere over the rainbow, bluebirds fly. Dreams that you dream of, dreams really do come true. Ooh, someday you wish upon a star, wake up where the clouds are far behind me, where trouble melts like lemon drops high above the chimney top. That's where you find me, oh, somewhere over the rainbow, bluebirds fly, and the dreams that you dare to, oh, why can't I? Well, I see trees of green and red roses too. I'll watch them bloom for me and you, and I think to myself, what a wonderful world. Well, I see skies of blue and I see clouds of white and the brightness of day. I like the dark and I think to myself, what a wonderful world. The colors of the rainbow, so pretty in the sky, are also on the faces of people passing by. I see friends shaking hands singing, how do you do?
Edie, and I am the chair for the board for the Gathering of Baptists. And it's my honor here to be able to welcome you. For those of you who have been part of the Gathering for a long time, as well as those who are new to our community. I'd also like to welcome our guest speaker, Cindy, and I hope I'm going to pronounce this right, Rasmussen, who will be sharing with us today. Concerned Baptists have raised their voices to reflect, to study, and to gather, and to support, to challenge, and to participate in the kingdom work here in this community of Gathering Baptists. Today we are meeting in a hybrid format. We have those who have gathered here in person at Burlington Baptist Church and others all over Canada. I'm not sure if we have any of our American friends or not who are connecting by Zoom. We're proud to be able to host this event today at this wonderful place, and we're thankful for Burlington Baptist Church for welcoming and hosting us. This is a place where everybody is welcome, so welcome everybody. And now I will call upon Karen, who will do our centering worship.
Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change states in its 2022 report that human-induced climate change, including more frequent and intense extreme events, has caused widespread adverse impacts and related losses and damages to nature and people beyond natural climate variability. The extent and magnitude of climate change impacts are larger than estimated in previous assessments.
Widespread, pervasive impacts to ecosystems, people, settlements, and infrastructure have resulted from observed increases in the frequency and intensity of climate and weather extremes, including hot extremes on land and in the ocean, heavy precipitation events, drought, and fire weather.
Hundreds of local losses of species have been driven by increases in the magnitude of heat extremes, as well as mass mortality events on land and in the ocean. Some losses are already irreversible, such as the first species extinctions driven by climate change. Other impacts are approaching irreversibility, such as the impacts of hydrological changes resulting from the retreat of glaciers, or the changes in some mountain and Arctic ecosystems driven by permafrost thaw.
Listen to the words of the prophet Hosea. Hear the word of the Lord, O people of Israel. For God has an indictment against the inhabitants of the land. There is no faithfulness or loyalty, and no knowledge of God in the land. There is only cursing, lying, and murder, stealing and infidelity. These things run rampant throughout the land. Bloodshed follows bloodshed. Therefore the land mourns, and all who live in it languish. Together with the wild animals and the birds of the air, even the fish of the sea are perishing. Lord, have mercy. Christ, have mercy. Lord, have mercy.
hear these words from the wisdom of Job and Psalm 104. But ask the animals, and they will teach you, the birds of the air, and they will tell you. Ask the plants of the earth, and they will teach you. And the fish of the sea will declare to you. Who amongst all these does not know that the hand of the Lord has done this? In God's hands is the life of every living being and the breath of every human being. All of us depend on you, Creator God, to give us food when we need it. You give it to us and we eat it. You provide food and we are satisfied. When you turn away, we are afraid. When you take away your breath, we die and go back to the dust from which we came. But when you give us breath, we are created. You give new life to the earth. I will sing to the Lord all my life. As long as I live, I will sing praises to my God. Bless the Lord, O my soul.
Let us pray. Mothering God, you formed us from the soil and breathed life into our bones. Thank you for our bodies and our earthly companions of flora and fauna. We are grateful that you choose to teach us how to be human by becoming a human among us. We confess that we have often abandoned our first calling to care for our earth home. Forgive us for the ways we have wounded creation and our human kin who most feel the effects of a changing climate. Open our hearts to wonder and transformation. Teach us to rebel against the silencing of your creatures, the felling of your forests, and the suffering of your children. Help us to become ambassadors of reconciliation on our way to a new creation. O love incarnate, may your kingdom come on earth as it is in heaven. Please stand while we sing a hymn that you may not be familiar with. It's called Touch the Earth Lightly, and the words will be on the screen.
Thank you, Karen, for reminding me that I'm up next. My order is here so that I won't lose it, but I couldn't read it from back there, wouldn't you know it? Welcome again, everyone, or welcome to those of you who are here in person again. I had a chance to say that to you earlier, but welcome to those who are joining us online. We're delighted that you could be a part of this. I'm Dave Ogilvie. I co-chair the program committee for the Gathering of Baptists along with Karen Turner, and it is our delight to welcome you to this, our spring gathering. We're still figuring some of this stuff out. We were plunged into a pandemic 3 years ago, and we had to figure out how to do things online. Now we're trying to figure out how to do things as a hybrid form, and it's trickier, I think, than either totally online or totally in person. But we're getting there. So be patient with us, grow with us, if you will, and hopefully we'll all get there together. I want to say thank you to members of our congregation here at Burlington Baptist Church who have been helping behind the scenes with hospitality. We are grateful for your leadership and for your care. Thank you for all that you've provided. This was an announcement I should have made earlier, and that will have no meaning for those of you online whatsoever. But for those of you who are here in person, I trust you found the washrooms in the hallway out there. So that probably should have been mentioned earlier, but if you suddenly all leave the room, I'll understand that I should have done better on that. They are both non-gender specific washrooms. One, though, is wheelchair accessible, and that one has a special lock button on the wall you'll want to use. If you don't, you may have company. So please make use of that. The way that our time together will flow is that we are all we're already well on our way, and thank you to those who have led us into our time. The guest speakers. Is that me? You might want to turn the sound off on that. There's a bit of a delay. Case in point, thank you for illustrating that, Leanne, the complexities of doing the hybrid. Those of you who are online will find a chat box on your right-hand side of the screen, and you will be able to send messages to us. We have someone who will be monitoring those messages, and in particular, during the Q&A session a little bit later on, we're going to invite you to submit questions for our guest, and we will relay those questions to the group at large. And if this works, we're going to be amazing. It's just great. We'll see. So our guest speaker will be introduced to us shortly, and I don't want to steal that thunder. But following her presentation to us, then we will take a short break. Those of you at home can just take a short break too. Don't go too far though, because we'll come back for a Q&A session. We want to be able to engage our speaker in conversation. That's such a rich part of being together in person. And then following that, because Cindy is a member of the faculty of CRCDS, Colgate Rochester Crozer Divinity School, we are in the midst of nurturing an early relationship with this divinity school, and it was just too good an opportunity to pass up having Cindy here. She's going to tell us a little bit more about the divinity school and maybe a little bit about some of the course offerings, that many of which are accessible online. So if you're interested, I hope you'll stick around for that part. And then we have a very brief business meeting. When we get together as a community, there's always a little bit of business to transact. It's very brief today, but after that brief little bit of business, there are several important announcements that will be shared. So I encourage all of you to stick with us. If you're at home or if you're here in person, stick with us right through if you can. This is all part of our life together as a community, so be a part of it if you will. As we meet together today, we acknowledge that these lands surrounding the Great Lakes on which we live and gather here on Turtle Island are steeped in Indigenous history. This here in Burlington is the traditional territory of the Anishinaabe, the Attawandaronk, the Haudenosaunee, and the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation, who were the caretakers of this land long before the newcomers arrived. We seek a new relationship with the original peoples of this land, one based in friendship and respect. Acknowledging territory then is a beginning, but not an end in terms of our work of truth-telling and reconciliation. We pray that Creator will teach us ways of justice and right relations so that our First Nations might flourish in ways that are true to their history and cultures, and that we might live together in peace. I'm going to invite Karen to come and introduce our speaker to us. Thank you, Karen.
It gives me great pleasure to introduce the Reverend Dr. Cindy Rasmussen. She is Assistant Professor of Public Theology and Eco-Justice at Colgate Rochester Crozer Divinity School in Rochester, New York. And when I was kind of exploring the website of Colgate Rochester, and I saw that, this is before we had asked her to speak, I saw that they had a professor of public theology at Eco-Justice. Like, can you imagine, at a seminary? I was really impressed. But she is also an ordained Episcopal priest who has served a city parish for 15 years and continues to serve at St. Mark's and St. John's in a part-time capacity. Her scholarship currently focuses on church history, innovation, and the earth. She loves to teach, learn, reimagine, and engage. She lives in Rochester with her wife of 20 years, Mary Ellen, their precocious dog Ginger, and their sweet cat Latte. She is delighted to be in Canada and has been looking forward to our time together. Cindy.
Thank you, Karen. I wanted to bring as many devices as possible up here, so I think I'm doing well. It is so good to be with you all and to be back in Canada. I have a connection with Canada that goes back to my time working on my MDiv in my early 20s, and the world, you helped me in that the world became a lot bigger and more wonderful when I spent some time in the Northwest Territories in January. And believe it or not, my life didn't get smaller, it got bigger, which is counter to what many people thought would happen when I went to the Northwest Territories. I appreciate those of you who are joining us online today. Thank you for watching, and I invite your comments and questions. And a special thanks to Dave and Karen for the invitation to come here and the conversations that we've had before this online. Let's see. It worked. Which is a great lead-in to something that I'd like for us to do, or I invite you to do, is every time I switch a slide, I invite you to take in a deep breath. It's such a beautiful thing. That idea and concept of roha in the Hebrew, of God blowing life into all of creation, is something that the older I get, the more I appreciate. And knowing that the plants make that possible for us gives me delight to no end, and it also is an opportunity for us to reset. And I find that particularly in the classroom, when we're considering new things, it's always good to breathe. So I invite you to do that. I want to start with God, because I think that that's probably a good place to start for this group in particular, and I'd like to start in the book of Genesis with chapter 2. So this is the second creation story that we hear, and the focus is a bit more on human beings. But before we get to human beings, we are told that God created all that is, and then God planted a garden. I'm confident that that is not because God was simply bored. There was something intentional about God creating a garden. And I think for millennia, we have kind of passed over that image of God creating a garden and doing something intentional in creation as just kind of an afterthought of God. But in fact, I think it's something that can help us right now at this time. So I'd like for us to start there and to consider that. And the state of our creation, which I'm sure we're all familiar with to varying levels of the peril that we find ourselves in. Certainly, I too went to the United Nations, and our planet in peril, human-induced climate change is the largest, most pervasive threat to the natural environment and societies the world has ever experienced, and the poorest countries are paying the heaviest price. I'm sure that's not something that is new to you, and maybe what brings you here today. The question of what do we do about this? And how can we be advocates from a Christian perspective in the middle of what we find ourselves in, which is this catastrophic state? I somewhat surprisingly have put next to this peril the state of the church. The church in peril, and this is, if you will forgive me, a statistic from the States, but I think it's pretty parallel in some ways in Canada. About 64% of Americans call themselves Christians today. That might sound like a lot, but 50 years ago, that number was 90%. According to the 2020 Pew Research Center study, that same survey said that Christians' majority in the U.S. may disappear by 2070, probably before then. So, why do I have these up together? It is not because I think there is a link between the decline of Christianity and the decline of the planet. That is not what I am saying. I'm not saying that if we prayed hard enough and did the right things, we wouldn't be in this predicament because God would bestow favor on us. I am not saying that. What I am suggesting is the same human impulse that is in us, dare I say sin, turning in on ourselves and selfishly being part of this world that we are a part of that apparently has been with us since the beginning of human beings, may have something to do with both of these realities. And I'm going to explain that a little bit more and more broadly. That is to get your attention. So if you're feeling a little uncomfortable right now with that parallel, it's exactly where I want you. I hope it's okay. I hope it's okay. I also recognize that when I first put these slides together, I said our planet in peril and the church in peril, and really it's God's planet. It's not ours. And we'll get to kind of that language in a few minutes. So I want to share with you something that's a little different from somebody that spends quite a bit of time in academic circles, and this is a perspective from kind of an organic perspective, if you may, from the trenches of ministry. I started my ministry in an urban parish as rector of St. Mark's and St. John's Episcopal Church at 1245 Culver Road. And I was sent there not from a call process, but from the bishop saying, things are not going well in this parish. He did bless me along the way, but it felt more like, good luck. Now, this story is very similar to the story of many urban parishes of mainline traditions, in that there was a phenomenon called white flight in the 1960s and 70s, and lots of resources left our urban centers in the States. And what ended up happening was the churches that relied on that income but were really built around that cultural way of life left with the money because they couldn't exist without it, they said. We won't get into the racial reasons why that happened, because that would be too uncomfortable right now. But there probably was something to do with race in there somewhere. And so I ended up in this parish 15 years ago and walked through the front door thinking, naively so, that a couple of brilliant, they couldn't just be okay, but a couple of brilliant marketing plans, maybe some right advertisements in the right newspapers in the city, maybe a couple of dynamic preaching moments would turn this thing around. No problem, we got this. And I remember my first couple of weeks at St. Mark's and St. John's, after I broke up the fighting among the acolytes that were literally trying to light each other on fire. I remember thinking, as I was preaching and somebody was using the F-bomb out in the narthex, that as the words from my sermon that I had beautifully crafted with very large font so I wouldn't lose my place, I found myself saying, our best days are ahead, and looking out and going, you are lying. Our best days are behind us. Our best days are behind us. You are here, Cindy, to be a chaplain for a dying church. You are here to go down with the ship. The sooner I was to wrap my mind around that, the better off I thought we would all be. And I prayed, I continued to pray, and nothing happened except conflict. There's a lot of conflict, because when a ship is perceived or in reality going down, there's a lot of conflict. Because everybody wants the lifeboat, and there's only a couple of them. And so I found myself in a leadership position that was impossible, and I went to the powers that be, hoping to get some relief from this situation. And I was told, and this conversation actually took place near the garbage dumpsters of the church, which I think is a significant backdrop if this ever becomes a film. I was told, well, we don't know. This is why God sent you here. And I said, thank you. And I remember going inside and saying, this is really bad. When I took over at St. Mark's and St. John's, the budget for the year was $250,000, $250,000 US dollars. Our pledge and plate coming in was $60,000. We had burned through an $850,000 endowment literally like wildfire, because we were trying to stay afloat at the time. It's to set the scene. And the moment where learning started to happen, and I hate to say that it was not immediate because I'm a little slow on the uptake, God is very aware of that, was when I found myself literally down on my knees asking God for help, and that I couldn't do it. It didn't matter how many degrees I had. It didn't matter how many books I had on my shelf. I didn't know how to change the reality that we were in. I preached just about every Sunday from that moment on about the real situation that we were in. And I figured we had three choices. We could either burn through our money like we had and close the church. We could give our money away to the diocese. That's how it works in the Episcopal Church. Give our money away back to the diocese and close our church. Or we could change. But here's the catch, and this is why it was not an attractive option for the congregation. I didn't know how, and there was no guarantee that something good was going to come out of that. Can you imagine being part of a congregation where you heard that a lot of times in a sermon? Oh. And yet, that was the message for about a year. 1 year. And then we were at a board meeting, and I wouldn't let the congregation make a decision. I said, we've got to stay in this space, because if we say we want to change, because everybody immediately goes, oh yeah, let's change, let's do it, let's go. But I needed to know that people really were feeling called to do the work, because it was going to be hard and it was going to be painful. And we didn't know where we were going. And at one board meeting, they finally said to me, we think we should change. And the next day, my rector's office at the time was right out near, we probably had the smallest amount of land of any church in our diocese. I heard a chainsaw. And I looked outside, and one guy that was on the vestry had a chainsaw, and he was taking down these scrub trees outside my office. There had been no vote. I said, Jerry, what are you doing? What are you doing? And he said, we're changing. Oh, we were changing. And at that moment, things really did start to change. It wasn't just those trees. Today, and I want to show you some pictures. That was a moment that St. Mark's and St. John's started a garden. We planted a garden. And I was confident that we wouldn't be able to find volunteers, because we couldn't find volunteers for anything. We just couldn't. But you know what? They showed up. And then I said, okay, well, maybe we'll get them in May, maybe June, but July comes, there aren't going to be any volunteers then. And they kept showing up. That was at the church. Today, we have 5 community gardens around our Beechwood neighborhood. High violence, high poverty, a lot of things that are going wrong in that neighborhood. This was 2018, a lot that we got from the city. This is yesterday. This is yesterday. Let me show you this. 5 years ago, completely hopeless, on my knees, not having a clue what to do next, and this was yesterday. After our third group in April, our third group of college-related folks came out to dig shovel compost, set up, high school kids, set up those beds, laugh, hang out with each other, and then thank me after they do it. Thank you so much, Pastor Cindy. Thank you for coming and letting us do all this hard labor. You're welcome. You're welcome. Good Friday has to happen before Easter Sunday. There's my sermon for the day. Good Friday has to happen before Easter Sunday. Now, what I'm suggesting here today are there's things to learn that we need to be paying attention to that are in the climate crisis that we're experiencing right now. They're important lessons for us to get and to understand so we can, in really a powerful way, make the transformation that God's calling us to make in the world, to go deeper. Now, when I first heard and received this invitation today, I thought about I could come up with a number of things that you all could do to make the world a better place, right? And then, as a matter of fact, I've heard from a couple of folks, well, what are you going to say? I don't own an electric car and I have no plans on getting one. You know, I try to recycle. I'm a good human being. I care about the planet. But what I'm suggesting today is this is an opportunity for us to go deeper. I want to hold that up because what if it's possible for the church and the world to no longer exist in two different spheres, but for us to find a way to become God's presence in the world where healing takes place. And we don't know what that looks like yet, but we all of us, regardless of doctrine and divisions, decide to sign on for the journey because it's really cool. Now, that is not an academic argument, right? But I'll tell you who does get it. All the people that aren't here today. It's so cool. It is so wonderful to be part of something bigger than yourself and moving in that direction. And it's so powerful to be among leaders who have the humility to say and understand, I don't have the foggiest clue what is going on. But you know what? I'm going to experiment, and I'm going to see what God may have in store for us in this place. You see how all of a sudden it puts us all at the same place, and everybody's ideas then are able to flow. I was talking to a colleague a couple of days ago, and she asked me if I had heard about putting a bulletin board up at a church or wherever it might be that said, your favorite failures. And the more I thought about that, the more wonderful I thought it was, because it starts to create a culture in communities where it's okay to fail because we're learning along the way. Death to life, Good Friday to the resurrection. Then that's Myri. Myri and some kale. When I was rector, 5 years before we started the gardens, I would be sitting in my office with my computer behind windows, some of them all the way down, kind of underneath the sanctuary, had been barred up. We had security systems everywhere. We had big, heavy doors to prevent our food shelf people from getting up into our sanctuary because we had such a problem with too many people being in our sanctuary. No. And then over time, over those 5 years, things started to disappear. I don't know how it happened, But we started to paint, and then some of those bars didn't come back. And we started to trust the people in the neighborhood a little bit better. And before we knew it, after years, those gardens went in, and I found myself, instead of being locked behind bars in my office, I was out weeding the tomatoes. And people stopped and asked me about the tomatoes. They had never rung the bell and asked me about my understanding of the Eucharist and if I believed in the real presence of God. But they knew that they wanted to know about those tomatoes because they had a story connected to those tomatoes. Their grandmother had taught them how to plant tomatoes. They had a recipe, the best recipe for salsa that you could possibly imagine. And then the salsa wars started. But the amazing thing was the gardens, yes, it was about the food and it was about regenerating the earth, but it was also about teaching me and the people in that church about humility, about how God works in the world, about connections and how important that is, not just between human beings, but with the earth itself, what that gives us and how much we've lost. I never would be doing this work if I hadn't had those awful days of trying to figure out what to do next. If I could have gone to a meeting in those first 5 years and had the answer, wrote the check, I would have done it. I would have never been out in those gardens. But there was no other way. And I'm so very grateful for it. Myri. The stories we tell. What I want to suggest today is something that you've probably heard a lot, which is the narrative matters, right? The stories that we tell others about ourselves, the stories that we tell ourselves about ourselves really matter. And I'm just going to use an example that I know, but I'm going to invite you, as I'm telling you this example, to think about your own church community. And think about the narratives you tell. If you had to give the elevator speech to somebody about your church community, what would you say? What's the narrative that you tell about your church community? This is the one, St. Mark's and St. John's. They joined in 1927. This is the one they told themselves when I got there. In probably turn of the century, 1900, two congregations decided that they might want to be in relationship with each other. And over time, because of economics and various factors, they decided to join together. And so they put a cornerstone, which to this day, 1927, right there, people invested heavily in this right before the stock market crashed. And they went ahead with the building of this church. So we've been two saints for many years, almost 100 years now. The story that we told ourselves was the story from the St. John's perspective. So there's two churches, obviously, St. Mark's and St. John's, and the story that we had always focused on from the 1970s forward was the St. John's perspective. And the St. John's perspective was the 1950s were the glory days of the church. This was the time where the church was packed. This is when we had to build on so we would have more room for Sunday school spaces. This is when God was really present. And now look at us now. How many times have you heard about the decline of Christianity? Right? Other than the time that I just mentioned it. I mean, it's all around us, right? In the Christian church. So that's the story. So several years into my, like I said, I'm a little slow on the uptake. Several years into my ministry, I was reading this small pamphlet that this couple had put together on the brief history of St. Mark's and St. John's. I'm like, oh, this is nice, and I'm flipping through it, and I get to St. Mark's, the story of St. Mark's. St. Mark's began in a blacksmith shop on a dusty street in the middle of the inner city of Rochester, New York. They were kind of the ugly cousin in this partnership. And you can tell this because St. John's, this was the original St. John's building, looks a lot more like St. Mark's and St. John's. This is the architect that won the war, right? Won the battle. And it was obvious that St. John's had the money, but what occurred to me was the narrative, and we had this in our own history, that was part of our DNA that we had forgotten was we were the scrappy people of St. Mark's. We had come out of the dust of those streets and the blacksmith shops. We were much more of a blue-collar church than a white-collar church. We had forgotten that over the decades that came after. And for me, that was a particularly important moment because all of a sudden my perspective changed on what to look at and the point of reference in our history and the narrative now that we could share with each other. So our narrative was not about the declining church of the great days. This was about Jesus' ministry in the early church at the blacksmith shop in Rochester, New York, connecting with people, not concerned about their stock portfolio, but connecting with people. That became our story, and once that became our story, things started to change because we understood ourselves very differently at that point. I think one of the defining moments for me was probably 3 or 4 years into my ministry, I went to a clergy event, and a former priest from the church came up to me and really made a point of coming up to me and said, you know what? He said, I don't want you to feel bad. I was like, I was feeling pretty good that day. I want you to feel bad. I'm like, well, and he said, I remember standing in that pulpit in 1980 and looking out at that congregation and saying to myself, I hope he said it to himself, we're dying. So when the congregation dies, he said, I just want you to know it's not your fault. This was supposed to be solace. Because of the narrative that we tell ourselves and what is actually what we have come to understand as being important in the life of the church instead of what I think our mandate is on the love commandment and the great commandment. So, one of the things that I want to talk about today is the importance of looking back at our story and identifying the narrative, defining narratives for us today. Those stories, and we probably don't know those stories yet. That's the beauty of it. We have to actually talk and listen to people, right, to find what those are. The process of doing that is the process that you all in Canada have shown the world in many ways, and South Africa actually did in a big way, is the Truth and Reconciliation process. I'm going to suggest today that I think that that's what needs to be done for history, and the history of the earth, and the history and connectedness of the church and the earth. What harm has been caused? Because what we do is we're trying to deal with all these symptoms, and they're catastrophic. And we need to do something, and we should absolutely do something yesterday. So let me be clear about that. At the same time, in order for the world to really heal, we have to start unearthing these stories of the damage that has been done, the pain that has been inflicted. And we don't know where that's going to end, but we do know that we have a mandate to have the courage to enter that conversation, right? And out of that, we have the possibility of healing not just ourselves, but the world around us. It's a big proposal, right? But I want you to think about it from the perspective of your own life and how that can reframe how you think about things and how you live. It's the difference between being a human being on a spiritual journey versus being a spiritual being on a created journey. It's that difference and that work. So the religious imagination and unlocking this. Once we do the work, right, and really sit in that place, which I'm making the analogy to my first 4 or 5 years in the parish, and it's different for everybody, I think, but once we do that work, once we listen and realize that there's a whole lot of stuff that I didn't know, and that instead of doing mission as the white savior in our neighborhood, what I needed to do was open myself up to the possibility of being changed, and that God might exist just as much outside of our sanctuary as inside of it. And recognize that that doesn't make me less than. It is okay. So, once we kind of, and that's a big if, start to deal with that and unearth stories and have those difficult conversations with each other, which require, and the technology, as much of a pain as it can be, really does offer an opportunity for us to have a global perspective on these stories. Once we do that, then we can start to kind of unlock our religious imagination as human beings and as a planet. And if not finding solutions, we enter into a movement of a journey together, knowing that God is present and desires good things for us and the planet in which we live. So, this is a picture that was developed for us of St. Mark's and St. John's once we started the gardens. And I thought it was really cool, and I thought it was a good example of what happens in terms of the religious imagination. Okay, I want to talk just briefly about the words that we use, the language that we use, and one of the kind of defining features of the ecology kind of movement has been around this language of stewardship, which the church so graciously shared with the rest of the world, and now we have this term that we use, and what I want to suggest is that the term's not so good, and that we need to unlock our religious imaginations. And I have one suggestion, but I'm looking forward to hearing others of what might be a better word for this. So stewardship, the definition, conduct of the office of steward, administration, management, control, in charge of. And then from an ecclesiastical perspective, the relationship, use of resources, especially money, time, and talents, in the service of God, specifically the organized pledging of specific amounts of money to give regularly to the church stewardship season. So we often think of we have to be better stewards of creation. But that is a very top-down understanding of our relationship with creation itself. So I just put this diagram here as a very kind of medieval representation of how the cosmos works, how the world works, and just suggest, and I'm preaching to the choir, I know, but suggest that this is not how the cosmos perhaps works. Maybe it's more about, and I'll come back to that, maybe it's more about this. Maybe it's about looking at the world in terms of an ecosystem of connections, right? And that breath that moves in and through that, and how each one of these creatures, except the skunk, each one of these creatures, maybe especially the skunk, is intimately related to the others. This is the word that I'm suggesting for the day. I may tonight wake up at 1 o'clock in the morning and think, oh, this is a much better one. I could hear one. Just shout it out right now if you could think of one. Syntrophy, the continuing relationship between the individuals of two different or more species or strains of organisms in which one or more, usually both, benefit nutritionally from the presence of the other, specifically that between two bacterial strains. So it's a biological understanding. And I love borrowing from other disciplines. So this was particularly attractive to me. It's this idea that we are all related, right? And the suggestion for me today is that if we live our lives like this is really true, if this is how we live our lives, this is our understanding of how the world works, then it gives us an opportunity to open our understanding of how the church works and who God is calling us to be and to build the kingdom of God in the world today. And my suggestion to you today is that that vision, that understanding has incredible promise in the world. And that maybe it's not good that this is online, but let me lean in and say this. It might be good that the church is in decline. Because God is asking us to do something, to be something different. And we human beings don't get it. We just don't get it unless we have what Paul Tillich called an ontological shock, a come to Jesus moment, a moment in our lives where we find ourselves down on our knees and recognize that we don't have all the answers. And our neighbor may have some, but she or he or they don't have necessarily all the answers either. And so we need somebody, am I going to say it? We might need the Catholic down the street because they might know something, and we're going to need to know this beautiful surprisingly wonderful group of Baptists up in Canada who have all sorts of ideas and perspectives, because that is about the reemergence of a church that we can all be proud of and love. So I'm just going to throw out a couple of things here. Thank you for the water on my right side. Because I think these are fascinating ideas, and you all are just very well read and have a lot of experience, and if you have connections with these words, I would love to hear more from you if you've read anything on them. The first thing is embodiment. So, as I told the story about me being out in the garden, my first kind of thinking around that was that it got me outside, right? And it got me doing something that meant that I was connecting now with people. And I cared about them because I heard their stories. And they were powerful. And I wanted good things for them. And so I wanted to invest my time in making and helping them so good things would happen for them. This is all from a tomato seed, right? What I hadn't considered until a couple of people shared this concept with me is this idea of embodiment, right? And the idea of embodiment is we have become so trapped in our Western thinking, in our heads, because our intellects are so awesome. Sorry about my sarcasm. I should have apologized for that right up front. And my students, usually it's 3 or 4 classes in before they start to get it. And some of them still haven't gotten it. But our intellects are so awesome that we forget that our heads are attached to the rest of our bodies, and that our bodies have insights for us that have been trapped. And so one of the things that happens when you start to get out into the world, and those of you that hike or rock climb or mountain bike or walk or whatever that might be, garden, golf, what happens is those things are released in us, right? In a way that we become connected to our createdness. And that impulse in us that I think can only come from God. And as somebody that spent a lot of time in classrooms, the idea of digging in the dirt and then feeling that again in myself, that muscle memory that's released, was amazing. And being able to share that with other people was amazing. And then how to connect, these are questions, not answers, but how to connect our sense of embodiment and what that means with our understanding of Christianity and the incarnation and Jesus, and how it matters in Christianity that God came and was embodied in the world in a particular way, I think is fascinating, infinitely and interestingly so. Then there's this idea of shape-shifting that was certainly present in indigenous spirituality and cultures, and has been oftentimes relegated to the side, even to the point of being seen as evil or voodoo or whatever it might be by missionaries. But I do think there has been more and more being written in theological circles around this idea of shape-shifting, because what it does is it starts to unlock the religious imagination. And that is a wonderful tool not saying to worship the shape, just to use it as a catalyst for thinking about new possibilities. And then changing the landscape. To go back to those pictures that I had shown initially, I never would have thought that corner between Parcells and Denver could be what it is right now. I never would have imagined that. There's so much that I can't imagine. As a leader in the church and as a professor at a seminary, being able to say to students and parishioners and people I just hang out with on porches around our neighborhood that this amazing thing has happened. This amazing thing has happened. And that God's responsible for that. And that somehow with the resilience that we needed, the fortitude that we needed, we as human beings and the rest of creation came together on that small corner when the world is burning, literally, and did that, work together to create that. I cannot tell you how transforming that is. Now, what is St. Mark's and St. John's today? Did I become a clergy person for a kind of a hospice situation with the church? We're open. We continue to garden. Our church is more active probably on Monday through Saturday than on Sundays. Still have a worship attendance, probably average 35 to 40 people. We worship in a circle now. We are, I would say, knock on wood, really healthy as a community till I get home tomorrow. No, but really healthy. We enjoy each other's company, and we have expanded our understanding and our definition of membership in our bylaws, that it's not just people that come on Sunday morning, it's people that understand that St. Mark's and St. John's is their spiritual home, whatever that may mean, and that is true for a number of volunteers. So when they end up in the hospital and they don't have a spiritual home, but that's really important to them, they'll call me. There's nothing better, or few things better in the world than getting that call from somebody that would never have stepped foot in a church. But in that moment, and 9 out of 10 times, they know Psalm 23, and they know the Lord's Prayer, and they hold it dear, and it is holy to them. And it is an honor and beautiful, beautiful thing. So there are all sorts of theological writings that are happening now, many that I've learned about today, that you all are reading and have been a part of those conversations. Some that I find particularly interesting are indigenous writings from all over the world, and what that perspective means for how we understand one another, how we understand who God is, and being open to that. And then the womanist perspective is really, has been life-changing for me, particularly the woman Fannie Lou Hamer. Some of you may know who she is, she was. She was in the South in the United States, and at a time of the Civil Rights Movement, and she was a gardener, and she became an activist, and she had no business being an activist based on the powers that be, and she did it anyway, and she kept growing her garden and doing the work. And so that's how I want to kind of close my prepared comments with you all today, is to encourage you In this world in which we live, especially after the pandemic, it is much easier and understandable for us to go and sit in our favorite chair in our house and to turn on whatever our favorite news station is and watch the world. What I am suggesting today is God's desire for us is something different, and it's about possibilities. And that is going to bring not only the earth back to what God desires for it, but also educate and bring God's people back to a place that God's always desired us to be. Thank you.
Get all your devices.
Got all my devices. Thank you.
Cindy, thank you. You have sown, you are a gardener indeed. You have liberally sown seeds that we need to water together with you. So we're going to do that in conversation, but we're going to also respond to some other human needs for just a moment or so. Let's take a quick 10-minute break and meet back here and engage Cindy in conversation in our Q&A session shortly. See you in 10 minutes.
Okay, absolutely.
You good there? Oh, there we go. Let's come back together if we can.
Okay.
Getting comfortable here.
I thought I was getting...
You need to kind of settle in here because we're going to put you to work tomorrow morning here too.
Well, Kim got me set up with water on my right side. She asked me which side I wanted my water
That's where I
on.
put my water too.
Is that
So
right?
yeah.
Well, she said she was left-handed. So, yeah, so I learned. And,
She always claims that makes her means she's always in her right mind. So that's what she that's what she tells me. I know her better than that.
yeah.
I often think that the Q&A session is the best part of our get-togethers because we really get to, it's one thing to sit and receive and be grateful for what we receive, but it's also, I think, very rich to be able to engage with our speaker and have a little bit of conversation together. So is there anyone who has a question or a comment that they'd like to share to get us going? Not all at once. Oh, right here. Okay. I'll come to you, Deborah.
So I found that presentation really helpful. And one of the things, I was part of a congregation that considered themselves very green, but everything we did was really technology. Like we had solar panels, we had, a community car share, we had a teaching garden, things like that, but most of it was pretty technical. I'm now going to a church that considers itself a greening church, and it's completely different. And I couldn't figure out what the difference was, but you hit on it today, and it's the incarnational aspect of that, and the embodiment. So in this church, like tomorrow morning, we're going out picking out garbage by the river kind of thing, and there's very practical things that we're doing at the same time. So my question is, for a congregation who has seen creation care and things like that as technology, how do you get to the embodiment, incarnational stage? Or does that just come through pain?
And I'm going to use this as an opportunity to display kind of my sense of pedagogy when I say, if y'all have answers to this, please don't hesitate. So my first thought, from my experience, which is just that, a small slice, it was really important for us to be down and out in order to have a way back into something new. Now, having said that, there probably are ways by introducing, I think of it as, this is good for this group, I think of it, I grew up in the Catskills in New York State, and I grew up canoeing the Delaware River. And it's been a great analogy for me throughout my life because it's always been about finding the current. And in systems, which are true inside the church and outside the church, but in this case, in systems of the church, there are always groups of people that are ready to go on the journey, that are in the current. So finding those people that want to pick up some garbage alongside the river and are not only will consider getting their hands dirty, but ready to do it like yesterday. Having that group start, and then negativity is contagious, but so is that positive transformational experience. And so people will start to connect. As you can tell, I am like a undying optimist. So I'm hopeful that you don't that systems don't have to be completely down and out in order to be transformed. Yeah, you're welcome. Does anybody else have any ideas about that? Yeah, you got nothing.
I should just mention, too, to those who are at home watching us online, there is a chat box, just a reminder, on your screen. And if you have a question that you'd like to direct to Cindy, please just type it in the chat box, and it will be relayed to us as well. Who's next? I shouldn't say anything else, but who's next? All right.
Oh, you've got your own.
Yeah, you can use sure. Oh, maybe you don't have your own. Here, try this one.
A lot of what you're saying reminded me of Barbara Brown Taylor and Lying on the Earth and every altar in the world and so on. And one of the things we hear so much about is we are all one, and I think that's one of the things I'm getting from what you were saying is that the breakdown is when we decided we weren't, that we were somehow apart from, and over which we could have dominion and all that sort of stuff. And so for me, it's about dirt. It's about lying down in the dirt and so on. But I'm trying to shape my question. The story of the garden actually was very powerful for me, getting people out of what? Out of their heads, out of arguments, out of controversy, adversarialness, and so on, and then finding something that, because the controversies and the differences of opinion and all that don't necessarily go away, but maybe they do because you're all facing together in the same direction on a project. I think my problem personally is I feel about the environment two things. One is a sense of impotence. And every time I hear Antonio Guterres speak, I want to weep. And the General Secretary or Secretary General of the United Nations. But I also get angry. I get really angry. And for me, my work is, so what do I do? What do I do? Where do I go with that? So it is redemptive and not just, shredding me.
Holy anger.
Yeah.
It can be an incredibly powerful force for good in the world. And just a quick story. So I was asked by our bishop to be the dean of our city churches shortly after I got to St. Mark's and St. John's, which I dutifully did. I said, yes, sir, happy to do it. And what that brought me was a lot of meetings. I went to a lot of meetings. And inside the church, but a lot of conversations about Rochester being one of the top cities for extreme poverty, especially extreme childhood poverty. And so I would go to these, what I felt were rather extravagant breakfasts at our Riverside Convention Center with a panel up front of experts, and they were experts. And then we would have folks from the neighborhood serving us, right? And then we would learn about what the realities of the extreme poverty were in Rochester. And that same conversation had been happening for about 30, 40 years. And then my cynicism, which is something God and I talk about often, would get the better of me, and I was questioning whether it was doing anybody any good for me to attend those meetings. The moment, kind of the Kairos moment, was there was a shooting. Some guys were playing basketball at a Y, and there was a number of spectators and stuff, and they came out. It was like 9 o'clock at night. It wasn't late. And there was a drive-by shooting where a couple of these kids got killed. They were playing basketball. And so I get a call the next day from the bishop that says, as dean, will you come and stand with me at St. Stephen's, this Episcopal parish that wasn't far from where this incident had happened, and we'll have a live stream of us praying there. And I'm going to curse, so I hope people aren't too offended by that.
We can handle it.
You can handle it? Okay, good. I wanted to send up a warning. So I got in my vehicle to go over to St. Stephen's, which is across the city, and I couldn't do it. I couldn't do it because I had been participating in things like this for a long time. When there were homicides in the city, I would go with a group, an interfaith group, and we'd stand on the corners and we'd say a prayer where the violence happened. I was part of the Rochester Police Department ride-along group. I did homicide kind of pastoral care with folks with Rochester Police Department as well as the fire department. So we were on site when some horrific things happened. And I just couldn't drive. And I turned on Nina, this is more than you probably need to know, definitely, but I turned on Nina Simone's Mississippi Goddamn. I don't know if any of you have heard this song or heard her version, the live version of it, but it starts out in a place where you can tell that there's a very large white audience that came to see Nina Simone, and they're very excited about seeing this artist who is obviously fantastic, and she starts singing this song, and she starts to get into what the lyrics really are about, and she said, "You thought I was kidding." And in that moment, the realism of that kind of her tone and her pain and her vulnerability, it gets me. And so I went and I did and I blasted the song all the way across the city, the Holy Spirit at my back, I insist. And after doing that, I told the bishop afterwards that I had resigned from the position and that I wasn't going to be attending any more meetings. And that's when I committed myself to gardening and to that work, because I needed to be in those kids' lives before they got shot. I had to be there. I couldn't look at another mom. I couldn't look at another sister, brother, or friend, knowing that I was on the other side of it. I grew up in a family of funeral directors. That's the wrong side of it. God love you, and thank you for putting me through college, but that's the wrong side of it, you know? And so that was a profound shift for me. That was a holy anger gut move of I've got to do something else. And what happened in that moment, in that Kairos moment for me, when I walked through that moment and kind of got to the other side, because that takes some courage, right? And we all have those moments of whether we're going to decide to do that or not. God started showing me stuff. and started pointing me in the direction of just some amazing things. I mean, I could spend all afternoon talking about like miraculous stuff that happened from that point forward. Pandemic deliveries, thousands of deliveries out of this church that, had no business providing food for the entire city, because I was like, no zip code is off we can go anywhere, we can do anything. We had no business doing that. We had no money for it, we had no volunteers, we had no food. But it happened, and we did it because we leaned into it. And that kind of cred, like when you're invested in a community like that, there is nothing better than me walking down Rosewood Terrace on any day or night and having somebody yell to me from the porch, "Hey, Cindy, you want to come up and have a beer?" Which I never do. I want to be clear. But that, she curses, she talks about alcohol, but just that kinship with people that came from very different backgrounds than I did, to be honored to be let into that space. And so what I would say is one of the most important things we can do is to pay attention to that anger, and that our story and our God prepares us for those moments, because we're enough in those moments, and to walk through the door, whatever it means for us. Just walk through that door, whatever it is. You're welcome.
I like the be angry part. I don't like the not the sun go down upon your wrath and give.
Yeah, hallelujah. Here's to anger and righteousness. Yeah.
I just want to comment that it's funny, as you were speaking, I went on my cell phone and I was flipping through a lot of the photos that I have taken. I do a lot of, like during the COVID, I picked up my camera, and like a lot of other photographers have done, learned how to use it better, started taking photos, and that helped to open me up to more about what was going on around me. And, one of the things that I like to do is night sky photography. And it's as much as I can do in an urban setting. But looking across Lake Ontario, at 5 o'clock in the morning, trying to line up my shot and the stars you can't see in real time. Only the camera can pick those up in that urban light. And of course, from my vantage point in East Toronto, I can see the lights from all the cities around the Golden Horseshoe. And there's a little dark spot, and there's Rochester. Yeah. And then further along, you can see it with the naked eye. There's a huge smokestack at this other place. And it took me a while to figure out where it was. It's Oswego, where there's a big coal plant, and but just to be able to figure out where that is, where are things in relation to where I am standing, and for me to be able to connect to what's going on there. And your idea of connection. Well, I go back to the first two things I learned about Rochester. The first one, because I was getting into photography, was the Kodak plant, the Kodak. And the second one, it was easy, is Colgate Rochester University, because that's where the Baptist Divinity College is. And I thought, well, this is a very enlightening thing to be able to see what has happened here, and what happens when we dig in the dirt. Yeah. And I'm always trying to keep my hands clean when I'm doing photography, and my feet clean. I don't like to go in the mud and all that. But it's just I want to thank you for helping us dig into the dirt a little deeper and finding finding where we can connect, and we can look over the lake, and there's more out there.
Yeah.
With whom and with what we can connect.
Yeah.
So thanks.
Back at you. That is so beautiful. It's so beautiful. I'm reminded of, and I don't know which U.S. president it was. Just pick a president. Yeah, I barely passed my history comps. I'm kidding. But a president that, whenever he was overwhelmed, would go out of the Oval Office and look up at the sky. There wasn't as much light pollution, so that helps us in terms of time. And the reason why he did that is because he wanted to know kind of where he was in the system, and that as big as the decision seemed, it wasn't that big. It wasn't that big, and that he was connected. I'm certain it was not Trump, but yeah, I'm certain that's the only one. But it is beautiful, right? I mean, and the other thing that I think of is, I don't know if you've seen the documentary Born in the Brothels. Yeah, it's Born in the Brothels is the name of the documentary, and it's this photographer, and she gives these, I think, are they all women, young girls, cameras, and it's in India, and they go out and take pictures of their experience, and then as the documentary goes on, they have an art show for them in New York City, and so they all go over. But the power of the camera and the power, this goes back to what I was attempting to say earlier, is the power of the story. The power of the story. That's where I think Christianity is. That's where kind of the essence is how compelling the story of Jesus is, right? That liberating story. And when we lose sight of that for whatever reasons, we need to go back to that. And in the same way, people have those stories in them. We could spend all day talking about kind of connections and things that you're remembering right now. And those are really important, especially at a time where we're all feeling, so isolated and disconnected from people. Yeah.
Thank you. I'll reiterate words of thanks. I guess the easiest way of putting this question, you've spoken of a couple of sources of hope. Where do you find hope amidst all of these crises that we're facing, not just the ecological crisis? And does anybody have any reason to find hope in the church?
That's 2 questions.
Yeah. Oh, that's beautiful.
2 big questions.
As she closes her body language. So I have spent long enough on this earth to be able to admit that there's been many times in my life I thought I could wall myself off from any harm that might come my way. I think that that's an instinct that we human beings have. And surprisingly enough, it was not successful. And what I found is the opposite is true, right? Let me put it, I statements. When I have experienced kind of pain or a situation where there's dissonance, to lean into it. That's my cross moment, right? That's the crucifixion moment, to lean into it. Because, and there was some conversation about this earlier about education. It's in those moments where we're feeling discomfort that the learning happens, right? In that moment, that's where I actually find hope. And it's not because, it's not this prosperity gospel idea that we're, if it may cost me $100, but God's going to send me 1,000 back. No, that's not what I'm saying. As much as I wish that was true on some days, no. But what I am saying is the action, right? And it's almost like it's a spiritual discipline in a sense, is once you kind of open yourself up to the possibility of whatever God has in store for just us, there is nothing, and this is going to sound really ridiculous because at the same time I'm a realist, but there is nothing but hope for me there. There is nothing but hope. And so having that perspective is a really helpful one as a priest, and it's really, it's filled with not kind of this glossing over, or as Bonhoeffer talked about, cheap grace, right? It's not about that. It's about really kind of living as fully as I possibly can into the human experience, and then finding hope in the midst of that. Because the message doesn't matter unless you can find and see hope there, right? Not just on our good days. So even, and is there hope for the church? Yeah, but not. I mean, it's very arrogant to say this. I get it, but it's not. It's the church that I think God desires for us, that there's hope for. I think there's a wonderful, beautiful place, life-giving place for the church, but we have a lot to account for before we get there. And we have a lot of repentance to do. And and a lot of unearthing of artifacts that are not pretty. And then after that process, the church could live, but not until we do the work. That's what I think.
Let the two of you sort out who goes first. Thanks.
So I've noticed that whenever we try and come up with solutions to things, unless they are big or perfect, or adding something instead of taking things away, or we know 100% that this is going to work, people are just going to say, let's not do it. How do we take people with us on a journey such that they kind of move past the need for everything to be so certain and perfect and huge when we're trying to solve problems?
I think there's actually a way to use our human instincts that have been used for not so good purposes for good purposes. And by that I mean, it feels good. It feels good to do it, and I wish I could project this up on the screen. In the break, I looked at my phone and I have 3 pictures from my colleagues of Rochester Institute technology students today, as I was talking, doing the work in our gardens, and happy as can be. Happy as can be, it feels good. And I guarantee you, when they were leaving those gardens, they said to Maria on the way out, thank you. Thank you for giving us this opportunity to do this work. So that's the first thing, is recognizing that people really do want to be connected. and to assume the best about each other right off the bat. Because life is just so much better when we do that, right? And maybe sometimes people will prove us wrong, but a lot of times they won't. A lot of times they won't. So there's that piece. The other thing in terms of scale, because it's all about, impact and scale and how we're going to make really the change that's needed, because the clock is ticking and there's an urgency to this problem. And I don't want you to think that I don't recognize that there's an urgency to this what feels like, and in many ways is, an irretractable problem that we've created for ourselves. At the same time, recognizing that the nonprofit world, the church world, or NGOs, the church world, faith communities, and the for-profit world, we can all be on the same team. I think a lot of times we're at each other, and so, a lot of times, and you guys are, I'm sure, way ahead of me on this, is that it's profitable to do the right thing. It's just profitable to do the right thing in most instances. So there is a positive economic consequence for doing the right thing in the world. And so that becomes really compelling too, in terms of how things, and individuals, I know this has been said time and time again and shown to be true throughout history, but individuals really can impact the collective spirit and remind us of our best selves. So that's the other thing that I would say as part of that. Yeah.
I think the question is less so about how do we motivate people to care.
Yeah. Okay.
It's more so like we have people that care, but then when we put forward solutions like this is how we can move forward, it seems like if it's anything that might be like somewhat of a change in how they live their life, or if it's something that it's like, oh, this is not big, this is not perfect, there's no point in doing it whatsoever. How do we get across the point that it's like not one huge solution to a problem? Yeah. This is something that's happened over generations, over years, over decades. It's going to be many drops in the bucket until we like have something that's has some weight to it that can be used to put out the fire that we started.
Do you, what do you think?
I think that a lot of it ends up being conversations one-on-one with certain people, and then that message propagates from the person to person, where you talk to them about the solutions, and then if they say there's no point because, like, for example, there are some problems, I can't think of them right now, but whenever people talk about certain solutions saying, oh, not everyone's going to do that one thing, there's no point, like, oh, not everyone's going to walk or ride the bike instead of like driving to go to the park next to them. Like, there's no point. And then it's like, okay, but not everyone is going to recycle, but we still recycle. Why do we recycle? And it's like, well, because it's the right thing to do. Okay. But other than that, like, we've been taught that a bunch of us recycling, a bunch of us trying to be smarter about how we use our waste actually makes somewhat of a difference in the collective versus just individually. So if you today say, oh, it's a nice day, I'm just going to walk to the park, that's one person doing one thing, and if a bunch of people have the same idea, then that in itself would end up having a stronger impact. So I think Part of it is that we see things from an individualistic perspective, from like the small scale, and it's very difficult to see things from like the system or like the environment scale, from like that chart that you had up before, where everything is connected. You doing one thing is not just you doing one thing, it is literally you impacting the rest of the ecosystem that we all live in.
Yeah. Have you thought about seminary? No. Okay. Well, it was worth a shot. Yes. The other, an additional thing as you were talking that I was thinking about is how, like, my own journey, right? And what changed things for me was the connection to the earth and the, like, sitting on a brown field in Rochester, New York, where no one can build anything forever, and which I should not have been sitting on, but and looking around and realizing, now I knew this from books, but being there and looking around and saying, everybody around this brownfield is in extreme poverty. They don't have a choice of where they're living, so that's where we put folks. You know, it's the Aaron Brockovich thing. Once I made that connection, I'm recycling, because it's bigger than me, and I have, it's not optional anymore. It's an obligation that I have to do better, because, and that's the thing about the unearthing of history. It's not just the exercise of unearthing the history. It's, what are we going to do? What are we learning from this? How can we do better? And let's do better. We have to do better. But we have to look in the mirror first. And we have to experience the pain from the generations that come before us. People that say, you know, it's not my problem because I wasn't around at such and such a time. Yeah, it is. We're connected. We're connected. Our ancestral life is connected. It's a God thing for me. Yeah, that's it. That's it. Thank you for the questions and the answers.
We're going to do one more.
Okay. Sorry.
I've listened to the words connected to the earth. I heard Leanne speak about the earth, and our photographer spoke about Ontario, and Paul, of course, spoke about hope. What can we do? There are things that we can do and that we must do. I belong to a group called Grandmothers Act to Save the Planet. And 1,000 of us walked, a number of organizations, walked 5K through the land that this province is planning on which to build. And that land is sacred land. They're wetlands. It's a place where vegetables grow, where farmers have places, and where indigenous people have sacred grounds. It is our land. And what can we do? We have to stop it. Stories are important. Thank you. Stories are important. I have walked and I have held the sign up. I have signs on our front lawn. And one day I was supposed to go into Hamilton to a protest, and instead I spent the day with our 2 grandchildren. They're just little 8 and 10. And I said to them, you know, Charlotte and Isaac, today I was going to a protest in Hamilton, and it's about saving the planet. It's about saving the earth, this earth that God gave us. And they looked at me, and I said, and I chose to be with you this afternoon. Without hesitation, Isaac got up, ran over to me, and hugged me. I wrote to the Star and told them the story. And the first time I wrote, it was over 250 words. And so they edited and they sent it back to me. And they edited it again. But finally, they published it in the Star. So stories are important. And we must protect the wetlands. And when it comes time to any time of voting, please protect our wetlands, protect our earth. This is our earth, and we must save the planet for the next generation.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you. Yeah, part of the storytelling is connecting the land to the heart, right? So if those developers had a connection to that land, if their grandparents had lived on that land and had, let's hope, that they would feel differently about that as opposed to just a profit center. I don't know. I'm also, money is power and seductive. It's seductive and has a huge role in everything that we're talking about today. So in a sense, I am talking about kind of standing up as one person in front of the tank in Tiananmen Square, but that matters. That picture mattered. Yeah.
Cindy, thank you again for engaging us in an important conversation. I think for me, one of the reasons that I feel good about being part of this today is that part of my sense of hope in the church is that it was in the church that I learned to sing "This is God's Wondrous World." And to my listening ears, all nature sings, and round me rings the music of the spheres. So it was here that I learned that this isn't my planet to do with as I please. It is God's world, and I have a part to play in its future. So thank you. We're going to do a more formal thank you in just a moment, but one of the things that many of us hold dear in this group is that it was 30 years ago this fall that we held our very first gathering. And at least two of the people who invited us to that first gathering, John Dickinson and Gary Caldwell, are here today. And they invited us because something was happening within a divinity school that many of us had attended and had come to love, and among professors that we knew and cherished, and we felt that there was some need to respond to that, and so we did. It was maybe one of the battles we lost, but many of us have felt since then, maybe it's just me, but I've certainly felt since then that my educational home was lost to me at that time, and I've often felt a little bit like an orphan in search of a new home. And when Michael Ford invited us to consider getting to know more about CRCDS, it was a wonderful opportunity. And Cindy, you've been a part of that educational institution now for a number of years. Will you share with us a little bit about what CRCDS has to offer?
It just rolls off the tongue.
Eventually.
Thank you. So CRCDS is a special place in that we have a history of giants in the social justice world. We came together from a number of kind of seminaries over time, but some of the names include Walter Rauschenbusch, who wrote about the social gospel at the turn of the last century. Rauschenbusch was a German Baptist, and he served in a congregation in Hell's Kitchen New York City at a time when immigration was at a high and poverty was also at a high. There were very little regulations that government had put in place, and so what he experienced in his ministry in a very short period of time was atrocious. And he felt that what was being taught in seminaries was not connected to what was happening and what needed to be taught to address some of the social ills and what he saw as being Jesus's mandate. And so he wrote, he spoke. We have generations of Rauschenbusch, that legacy, and it's still a powerful force, I think, in the seminary today. We also, the Crozier part of the story, Dr. Martin Luther King graduated seminary from Crozier Divinity School, so that's pretty good. And Howard Thurman as well, and those of you who haven't had the chance to read his writings, I'd encourage you to do so. They are, they feel like must-reads for me, especially these days, probably all times. We also have what was the program of Women and Gender Studies from a very early on. There was a recognition of women in ministry and contributions that they could make, and so I'm proud of that. We currently we're no longer in the historic site where we were. I was joking with folks earlier that we came off the hill from the Angel Factory and we came into the city. And I think that's been, from my perspective, nothing but good. We're a seminary, we say, of and for the community. So even though a number of our classes are online, we also are deeply committed to what is happening in Rochester and places like Rochester around the world. We continue to be and have faculty that's interested in contributing to the broader conversation in the academy. And so we go to, my colleagues and I, American Academy of Religion and Society of Biblical Literature meetings every year, and folks present on a variety of different topics, so we can be part of that conversation. One thing that I will say, and I'm happy to take any questions from you, is that we recently had an alumni gathering, and they set up what they called a faculty fishbowl, which I was a little scared of. And so 3 of us sat in the front and talked about our pedagogy, what we find to be really important about the teaching that we do at the seminary, and what the conversation that we ended up having, which we've had among ourselves, was really generative in that we had a few folks that had relationships with other seminaries at other times, and they were like, how are you guys doing this? Because the work that we are doing right now is very creative. We're collaborative in the work that we do, and a lot of time in academia that can be challenging at times. We're also very interested in what the student is bringing and their experiences, not to the point of kind of losing content, but in the point of engaging and having people think critically about the work that they're doing. So there's all sorts of examples that I can give to that, but it's I would not have, I love the work that I do at St. Mark's and St. John's, and I would not have made the commitment to be on the faculty if it wasn't someplace that I believe in wholeheartedly. And so it's fun to share kind of the vision and we're always looking for folks, and our Baptist roots in particular are very deep in the history of the school. We're very diverse. We're small. We're growing, but we're small. And given that, it's amazing to be able to teach at a place where there's so much diversity in the classroom. I was sharing with folks earlier that in my Reformation and Modern Church History class, I have 2 students that sign on from Jamaica. And we were talking a couple of weeks ago, our topic was the transatlantic slave trade. And I have a number of African American students as well from the States, and for them to be able to have the conversation together around that issue and have myself get out of the middle of it and to see light bulbs start to go on because the education that was happening between them was just awesome. So that's a little bit about the school. I'm happy to share anything else that you might want to know, or yeah.
Dave, you and I were in school together. 2 of our profs, at least, were Colgate Rochester grads.
Oh, is that right?
That explains a lot.
And the chair of the board was one from my Sunday school, Dundas.
Wow. So we already have a long-standing connection. Yeah. Well,
one of our members is currently applying. One of our gathering members.
oh, that's right. Yes. Thank you. Thank you, Dabney. Gary was just making the point that some of our professors who taught us at McMaster were graduates of Colgate Rochester Crozer Divinity School, and that we even currently have a member of the gathering who's working on, I think, a DMin degree there. Is that right, Gary? I think, yeah. So we have a long-standing connection, and it's nice to feel that there's a place that we could turn for some further learning. So thank you very much for that invitation. You'll want to check out the website. I commend it to you, and all the course offerings, of course, are listed there as well. So
Excellent.
Good stuff. I would like to, at this time, call on Leanne. Please.
It is my pleasure to offer thanks to you, Cindy, for coming across the water to be with us on a subject that it hardly gets more important than this one. This one is about the survival of all of us. When I look at my grandchildren, I wonder. And children who they're 20 and 15, you're not little, but they're friends who are deciding that they will not have children. And our Indigenous brothers and sisters talk about 7 generations. Will there be 7 generations? Thank you for all that you have elicited within us, the sorrow, the grief, the laughter, the fear even, and reminding us of our connectedness with one another and with dirt, and how tending to those connections with one another and with the earthiness of our earth is one of the key ways of finding our way through to hopefulness rather than despair, and to joy rather than anger, which is certainly my piece of work every day. So thank you very much.
As I mentioned earlier, we have a little bit of business to conduct, and I'm going to call on the chair of our board, Blake Eady, to come and lead us through that. Please don't go away, because then we've got some important announcements to share too. Thanks, Blake.
That is our business.
Pretty much is.
Okay. Good afternoon. I'd like to call the business meeting to order. We were thinking that we would be talking about some credentials, but that's going to be put off, I think, till the fall. So our first order of business is actually an announcement about the Baptist Peace Fellowship of North America. And Karen is here somewhere. Yeah.
Hello, everyone. I'm bringing greetings, official greetings, on behalf of the Baptist Peace Fellowship of North America, Bautistas por la Paz. I'm on the board, and I've got a couple things written down because I just want to make sure that I didn't forget anything. Some of you will be very aware of who we are. Some of you will have no idea who I'm talking about. And for those of you who have no idea who I'm talking about, please know that this is a group. We have about 4,000 members. We're across the United States, Mexico, Puerto Rico, and Canada. And we now have members that are becoming involved
We've got a couple on the board from Colombia, different areas of South America. The Spanish involvement of the Baptists has been incredible over the last few years, and one of the wonderful things that has come out of the pandemic is that when we Zoom, we do not have to be in the same room, and we can be in another country and taking part in a meeting. BPFNA Bautistas por la Paz is progressive, it's intercultural, gender diverse, inclusive, and affirming. We work on that. And the work that we have been doing as a board for the last little bit has been on decolonization, on decentralization, on being anti-racist, and all that is involved with that. What I don't need notes to tell you is that the stories that are involved with BPFNA Bautistas por la Paz, the friendships, the worship together. That's what makes BPFNA Bautistas por la Paz for me. That's what gives me the hope. That's what helps me to understand what is going on in different parts of our hemisphere and different parts of our world. And that's why I think we as Canadians do continually need to be involved. You can ask me all sorts of questions. There's a whole lot of people that are in this room. Yeah, actually, there's a whole lot of people that are in this room that would be able to tell you even more stories than I can about BPFNA Bautistas por la Paz. You could also join us at Peace Camp, which we have annually, and once again will be in person in San Juan, Puerto Rico at the end of June. There's still time to register and get your plane. I think that's it. Please join us if you're able. Please give for those of you who are members who might not have given for a while. But please know that BPFNA Bautistas por la Paz has made it through the pandemic. We are working to be the people God wants us to be. That's it.
Second order is to call upon my other sister, Karen, to talk about our fall gathering.
The one time that Karen Hilliker and I were both on the board of the BPFNA, we were the Karens from Canada. and we still get that. Just to add to that, BPFNA is very close to my heart and has been extremely formative, not only in my theology, but in my way of understanding how the world works. And that the Peace Camp that is this year in Puerto Rico will be, I think, as powerful as the one a few years ago in Mexico, where those of us who are white and English-speaking are in the minority, and we're the ones that require the translation, and we're the ones who don't always know what's exactly going on, and it's good for your soul. So I really suggest that you consider it. However, now I'm supposed to talk about the gathering in October. It will be October 29, Saturday, whatever the Saturday is.
28th.
Oh, is it the 28th? Okay. And we're going to continue this theme of dealing with the climate crisis and ecological justice. The speaker for that event is going to be Dr. Sylvia Kiesmat, who, with her husband Brian Walsh, are organic farmers, not far from where we currently live, actually. But she is, and so is he, but she is a biblical scholar and theologian, has been teaching for years at the Toronto School of Theology, and has done a lot of really good work on the biblical, the place of creation in the biblical story, and the examining of our relationship as human beings to creation in the context of the biblical story. So this one will be going deeply into the Bible and reading it in a way that perhaps we have not, and seeing creation all over the place and our calling in relation to creation. So I really strongly urge you to come. Now, if in preparation for that, if you want to get to know how her thinking is about this, she and her husband, Brian Walsh, have written a book that came out just before the pandemic called Romans Disarmed. I should get Blake up here to wax eloquent about that book, but they are dealing with the book of Romans, and just turn on its head some of the ways that we have understood the book of Romans. So that's who will be speaking, and we don't know yet where it will be. Are we going to talk about that? Anyway, we need some suggestions as to where, what church location would be best. So if you have any ideas about that, share it with Blake. He's the one who knows. Thank you.
Yeah, Romans Disarmed was probably the best book I've ever read on Paul's letter to the Romans. It was phenomenal. So highly recommend it, and I'm excited about Sylvia coming. So our next order is Dave is going to talk about meeting locations.
Good segue, Karen. Karen and I, as I mentioned earlier, co-chair the program committee, and we are always looking for ideas. What are you concerned about, passionate about, inquisitive about? What kinds of programming would be helpful to you? So always feel free to be in touch with us about that. But one of the kind of practical considerations that we are faced with at this point is, if we want to do this kind of event where we can be both in person and online, we want to still be able to move around to different locales as we've done in the past, but we need to know that the infrastructure is in place, that the churches or the facilities where we meet will be able to accommodate us, not only to provide a meal, as we have enjoyed earlier, but also be able to provide the technological support that we need. So would you help us think through that? If you know of churches that might be sympathetic to who we are and would like to host one of our events, and you think would have the necessary pieces in place, would you let us know? Because we would very much like to see this show move. It's really convenient for me to have it here, and I know that I can draw on wonderful people who can do this work, but we'd also like to be able to move it to other locations as well. Just before, Blake, we move on, Paul Descartes had asked earlier if he might address us on something, and I thought I'd just pass things to him.
I have to say, on a personal note, that when I was thinking of going to Colgate Rochester Divinity School, I was told by the area minister, my pastor, and especially my Sunday school teacher to get over it. I'd have no future in the church.
I was told that about my pastor.
I've shared that this was a particularly difficult week for me. Several friends have died in recent times, including 3 McMaster University faculty, Al Dingle and Will Coleman, who is the founder of Peace Studies, Indigenous Studies, and Graham McQueen this week. There is a obituary in today's Hamilton Spectator. I believe there's a Burlington spin-off of the Spectator. Graham was a Chinese Buddhist scholar, but in the light of 9/11, and he felt government non-truth-telling, has been a prodigious investigator of the truths around 9/11. There is a remarkable summary on YouTube, which I urge, if you haven't heard his critique or the broad critique of 9/11 Truth Commission activity, a fine YouTube presentation on what really we need to know about that and how it is being used still today. Graham McQueen, presente.
I have one more quick announcement before we close.
Come on back up then and do the announcement.
I meant to mention this earlier, but if you are not otherwise committed tomorrow morning, I'd like to extend an invitation to you to worship with us here at Burlington Baptist Church. We gather at 10:30 every Sunday morning, and if you're not able to make the trip back, you can always join us online. Our guest preacher tomorrow will be the Reverend Dr. Cynthia Rasmussen. You may have heard of her, and she will be terrific. So please join us anytime, but in particular, I wanted to extend an invitation to you tomorrow. I also want to just say thank you again to members of this congregation, of my congregation, who have given support and leadership to today. Thank you. Bless you.
Is there any other business? I'm getting used to all these late editions. Come on up.
No, this isn't an edition. I'm actually on the screen. I was standing there because I was on the screen. I didn't want to waste time. I'm sure that many of you know Camp Hermosa and know the work that they've done over the years. In conversations with Camp Hermosa, they would like to let the gathering know that they are a fully inclusive camp. They've had a long process of discussing and working through issues, and in some cases not working through the issues, but they are, both their staff and their campers, it's important to them to be fully inclusive. And by that, they're not just thinking about people who are LGBT, although that's certainly one of their priorities, but they're thinking thinking of inclusive in terms of socioeconomic groups and all kinds of other things. They will be putting out a formal statement in June, but just in case anyone's thinking about camp, maybe not for your children, but for your grandchildren, Camp Hermosa still is taking applications, and they'd love to hear from you.
Is there any other business?
One more.
Seriously, Dave.
I just love this microphone. If you're sticking around and would like to join us for supper, we're gathering at a restaurant on Elizabeth Street called The Dickens. It's an old British pub and good pub fare. So we're gathering there about 4:30. It's a little early, but we had lunch early, and please join us if you can. I think that's it.
Before Dave has another announcement, I'm going to call for a motion to adjourn. I don't need a seconder. All in favor? Okay. We stand adjourned until our fall meeting, and now we'll close with the benediction. We are not owners. Our relationship with the earth should be God-centered rather than self-centered. We show honor and respect to God in the way we treat this earth. As we end this time gathered as a community, we prepare to serve in all scattered places of our lives. Go in the knowledge that God, our Creator, sustains and supports you in this service. Go with the assurance that Jesus Christ equips you for this service. Go trusting and relying on the Spirit, which will enable you to bear witness, to care lovingly, to work for justice, and may God's peace go with you. Deep peace of the running waves to you, deep peace of the flowing air to you, deep peace of the quiet earth to you, deep peace of the shining stars to you, deep peace of the Son of Peace. Amen.